All right. Okay, so we are having our first webinar with our inaugural artist in residence for the MCLA Artists Laboratory Residency. And we have Genevieve. Genevieve, pronounce your last name for me because often I think I get it wrong.
I pronounce it Gaignard. Think of
Gaignard.
gaining yardage, like a football player. I don't know.
I like that. I like that. I often need reminders, little hints and things. So we have Genevieve Gaignard with us, and we are so pleased to be able to have her with us, especially during these unprecedented times. Genevieve had planned to come in residence, and we're so glad that she was able to still come with us and that we can have these kind of virtual experiences with her. And the whole purpose of the residency is to provide access to accomplished artists like Genevieve, exemplars in the field for our students and the North Adams community, as well as the Berkshires, to access as well. I feel like we called this a workshop and not just a talk because we're hoping that in addition to being able to listen and hear the stories that Genevieve is going to share with us, that we can actually walk away with bits of advice, some means of understanding, even maybe some exercises or things to do or consider, as many of the people who will attend today are actually embarking on a career path, a journey similar to yours. So we're really excited about that. There are so many accolades I think that I could share about you and your career and all the things that you've done. I think that you are known in terms of your practice beyond just the photography that maybe most people are familiar with, that you have your mixed media, your collage, your installations, and your work currently up at Mass MoCA. But in addition to that, and people can definitely look at your CV and your website to see all the amazing collections that your work is a part of. But I think I first saw your solo show at California African American Museum in Los Angeles, and I am and was an amazingly big fan of yours. And I think I met you about 2 years ago at a event. I think it was a talk at the Underground Museum in Los Angeles. And I think it took all of that time and us to be on the East Coast to actually connect. So I'm really excited about having you here. I've got lots of questions for you tonight, and I'm sure people who are attending are going to have questions for you as well. But I think the best thing to do to start out would be, since this is your origin story here, tell us, Genevieve, what would you distinguish as the particular highlights, the most significant points as you embarked on this career path that brought you to this place? I know there are lots of different things, but I think people would probably be most interested in what are the highlights, what were the motivations, the people?
On my overall journey?
Yeah, to this point in your career.
Yeah, it's interesting if I look back in terms of the start, whatever that could kind of be labeled as. I've had a key person kind of just show up or voice something that just triggered the right kind of questioning in my mind to then pursue a bit further,
Yeah.
I can get into that a little bit more as we talk.
Sure.
But not only just people that I've met or have kind of informed me or influenced me, but just kind of having a bravery to kind of maybe not know what you're doing, but you're just still kind of trucking forward. And it's just, even though I am where I am now, I don't mean physically because I'm in my car.
I was going to mention that, but I'm sure people can see that. We can talk about that too.
I'm in Massachusetts. I'm not in North Adams, but I'm close. But just to be where I am now, and just thinking about how, although I have had success, in my mind, I'm not ignoring what I've accomplished, but it's like once you've done that one thing, it kind of checks that box, and then you're just, I don't know, I've kind of have this constant move forward, like what's the next step. It's not necessarily that I'm not satisfied, but there's just seems like the story keeps kind of going, which is I think what keeps me motivated.
Right. I think, well, that I think was something that I was thinking about as you were talking about what most artists or individuals that are pursuing anything is maintaining that motivation. And, you know, I think now is a particularly challenging time for that. But, you know, when you describe this always moving forward, not considering yourself in a place of, you know, I've succeeded in this way. Do you feel like there is an end game when you think about this? Like, how would you define success for yourself? Is it a kind of a constant, and is it a being able to maintain a certain momentum in your career, a certain place in your career? Is it one thing that actually defines a moment for you when you think about that? So something must motivate you, but usually it's that idea of, this is what I wanted, this is success. How would you define that for yourself?
I think for my specific path, success is me when I'm like 85 and I'm still having studio visits and I'm, you know, still relevant in the conversation and influencing other young artists and giving back what I've learned over the years, which I'm trying to do now even, you know, because there's a lot to it, and it's not like cut and dry, and not everyone's going to be on the same path, and you know, not everyone wants to be on the same path, but knowing that I'll still be creating, I guess, is what success
when you
look like to me.
On this, tell us a little bit more, like, when did you decide you wanted to become a visual artist? You wanted to pursue this path? And I think we could talk a little bit more, but I'm wondering too if things have changed since that started in terms of what defines success. But how did this all begin for you? How did this idea that I'm going to be a visual artist, I'm going to move here, all of that, how did that work out for you?
Yeah. Okay, so I guess I would start by saying I was always kind of expressing myself mostly through drawing at a young age, and also collaging my bedroom walls, which a lot of young people do. And I guess, you know, I really enjoyed art classes that I would take in high school, but I never felt like, oh, this is something I can necessarily do or be. I think from hearing it from my dad, he was always kind of like, you know, you got to have a specific career that will pay the bills. And so I always had that kind of voice in the back of my head. But I think I let that not deter me, but it definitely took me off that path a little bit. But so like right after I graduated high school, I had decided to go to Johnson & Wales University to pursue a career in baking and pastry arts. I mean, it's really artful. There's like, you know, the TV shows that are epic with, you know, cake decorating and whatnot. I don't even, you know, that stuff didn't exist, or those programs didn't exist then. But honestly, I think I just wanted to get out of my small town and just kind of be on my own and figure it out. But I went to, so I went to Johnson & Wales, and I was part of their 2-year program. And I was being like a kid out of their parents' home for the first time and going to a bunch of concerts and just like hang out. And it wasn't till like my second year or towards the end of my second year, like I really enjoyed decorating the cakes, but everything else was kind of like not that exciting for me. And so there was this one professor, chef, that was the cakes professor. And he kind of took me under his wing, and he would say, you know, like, what do you see yourself doing? Is this something that you want to pursue further? And I was kind of like, not really sure. And he was like, well, what do you like to do when you're not doing this? And I was kind of just like, I like art, but, you know, and I wasn't even a kid that like got to see a lot of art growing up. And it was just a kind of vague answer, was loose. I didn't really have a full understanding of what that even meant. But I, with his encouragement, he would give me assignments like outside of like what the schoolwork was, to kind of make a project. For example, you know, make a piece about, take your favorite song and make a piece about that. And like, I just got so energized, even just like the thought of that. And I can picture what the end object or thing looked like, and it was really not that great. But, you know, he took it and brought it home to his family, and he said, oh, we critiqued it and we thought this and that. And so quickly I realized, you know, I don't want to spend more time and my parents' money going to pursue this career that wasn't really like where I was feeling it. And so I moved back home, and I enrolled into art classes at Greenfield Community College, which to this day is like, I feel like the best thing I did. I feel like they have a really strong art program there, and it's also a place where you can, for less money, kind of explore the different ways of working and get more sense of art history. And so I really just did that. And I went to sign up for classes, but the first thing I did was sign up for photography class. And I don't know why that was something that came to my mind, as like, I'll do everything else I have to do, but I definitely have to take a photo class. My dad had taken a, black and white photography class once, and so maybe that kind of triggered that interest as well. And yeah, so like the first day of my intro to photography class, there was a slide presentation showing different artists or photographers. And yeah, I think the work of Diane Arbus appeared and just like rocked me, and I was like, that's what I want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the early kind of side of that, kind of figuring out, okay, this is what I want to do. And I can picture myself in the dark room, and this might sound cliche, but when you see the image appear from the developer in the dark room, and you're just like, oh my God, I've like figured out my purpose or something, it felt something like that, like, oh, I found like what I'm good at, even though I wasn't necessarily good then. Something felt like it made sense.
So it sounds like there were these, you knew that you were pursuing something creative, but it actually, do you feel like that professor identified you, or you identified him? Was there something that kind of, aside from class, that you just kind of felt a connection, and this relationship evolved into this kind of mentoring and helping you to guide?
Yeah. Well, Chef Hits was, he also did like decorative breads, and like he did competition stuff himself. I feel like I think he went to RISD prior to becoming a baker for furniture design or something, like, so he kind of had that that intuition of, maybe he saw that in me. I don't know, like, because we would have assignments where we would have to practice patterning that would go on tops of pinafores and cakes and whatnot.
Right.
And he would say like, oh, you have a really steady hand, and like the drawing part of it. And yeah, I think that was.
Yeah, and the reason I ask is I think sometimes people assume that there is one path and clearly there isn't, and you meet people along the way. It's not necessarily something that you intended or anticipated, but I think sometimes it does come down simply to right place, right time, or this is how it was supposed to work. It's not necessarily, I went to high school, I went to undergrad, studio art, and then I went to, there's lots of different ways, I think, that we find our path. Some of the things you said, and they were interesting because we've had conversations before, and you've talked about a couple of things. One is I definitely see you as somebody that has, or definitely makes an effort to help fellow artists, especially artists that are coming up, behind you. You've worked to support our seniors in their studio work, but I think that idea, I wonder that, it sounds like that kind of stems from what you've experienced too. But when you're going through this path, especially as a visual artist, in the courses, when you have, you have a canon of artists that are presented to you, when you look back now, when you think about the artists that you look to or that inspire you now, have those changed drastically from those that were first introduced to you, like a Diane Arbus, and how has that kind of shaped your practice a bit?
Yeah. I think it has changed drastically, like the artists I look at, especially like focusing on photography. I was mostly shown white male photographers.
Right.
And I don't even think at that time, I still didn't even know I was making work about necessarily. I think I always saw myself as other, but I was never quite sure like where my voice was. And so, in undergrad and whatnot, like you're getting a lot of assignments, so you're trying to like find your way through the assignments. So it gets challenging because it's like you're supposed to get inspired by that particular assignment, but maybe that's in the end, like that's not how you end up like really working. But I think there's always ways to find your voice through that assignment.
Right.
And also just to like push you out of your comfort zone. If you think you're supposed to work in a very particular way, or you feel drawn to that, then like an assignment is a good way to like force yourself out of that.
Right.
Because then you can always come back to the way that you do want to work,
Right. Well, it seems like, so you went from Greenfield, and then you went to Boston where you did your undergrad.
Yeah.
And so how was that transition, and kind of what happened in that particular span of time that took you to pursuing your MFA?
Yeah. So I would think I was at Greenfield Community College, which I never graduated from, even though I spent the most years there. But I did transfer from there to Mass College of Art as a second semester sophomore. And because at the time, I'm not sure if they still do this, but Greenfield had a program connected with a few schools, and Mass Art was one of them, where they kind of told you what classes to take in order to do that kind of transfer. So a few of my friends that I'm still connected with did that same thing. But yeah, I think when I went to Mass Art, it was intimidating. But at the same time, you know, different schools kind of, I feel like, have different things they're kind of known for. And that's based on the faculty, like how do those people work and what are they interested in? Although you get, a little bit of everything, I kind of felt like Mass Art worked for me because it was more in the portraiture kind of, or like environmental portraiture vein. There was an artist, David Hilliard, who attended Mass Art and also went to Yale. But he when I got to Mass Art, like, he was one of the artists that I was just like, oh, that's really what I'm like. The artist thing still stays with me, but I think it's more of like a mentality, or like the kind of subjects that she would photograph. I felt like I would be one of those people. So I think that's where her influence kind of came, and a little bit of her style in terms of how I would approach like taking portraits. But when I saw David Hilliard's work, he works in this kind of panoramic way. So you're seeing the subjects, but you're also seeing their environment. And when I think to what I make now, which I create environments as part of my practice, I could definitely, tip my hat to David's work for that influence. And just kind of seeing, I don't know, New England interiors, and like seeing kind of the everyday as artful. And I think that's something that I really hold on to in my work.
Do you feel like, so when I think a lot of people that will view this and are pursuing art careers will think about your choice of schools, how long you may have stayed in community college versus going to your undergrad, deciding to apply to Yale, and in your case and the choices that you made, what was, aside from, so Greenfield, there was a program that, you could matriculate into Mass College of Art, but beyond that, when you think about what's actually molded your practice and the work and the themes that you address, do you think that happened most in your undergrad? Was it just a natural evolution, or did your time at Yale play a really critical role in that? When you think back on that, was there anything that was very defining for you? Because a lot of people are like, I don't think I need an MFA, and some people don't. I mean, it depends on your pursuit. But what in your experience do you feel was defining when you look at that journey?
Yeah, I think always part of it is whether I knew what my voice was yet, that understanding of what it is to take critique, to take critical word on your work. And like, I feel like each step of the way, I've pulled something very specific, like at GCC with Tom Young, who was my professor there, who I still would say is one of my top mentors. Even though I don't really speak with him today, he's instilled enough in me that just keeps me motivated, or something I can kind of look back to. And I remember, because back then it was a lot of film, like we were shooting film mostly. So, you know, if we had an assignment and students were coming in with 2 rolls, he was just like, I'm lucky if I get a picture and I've shot like 20 sheets of film or whatever, because he shot large format. And so I don't know, I think I also wanted to like, I'm one of those, like, I wanted to like be good at what I was doing. So I feel like at first when I had Tom Young as a teacher, I was really like discouraged, and I felt like I would never be like at the level that would impress him or whatever. And I still don't know if that ever happened, but I felt like, I don't know, something about his class. I'm like, I know I'm going like on a little bit of a tangent with him, but so just like him pushing the students and me to like know that you're not always going to get something even after you've done a lot of work, you know, and you just be lucky if you get the shot that you end up getting, you know. Being able to like articulate your ideas and what you're trying to like go for. And I feel like I cried more at critiques at GCC than I did at Yale, even though I did cry there too. And then you know, I mentioned David Hilliard as an influence at Mass Art, but there was also a graduate student there at the time, Joe Johnson, and he was like the coolest. He was kind of that like, you know, I don't know how to explain it, just like the art star kind of mold, I guess, just being a white male. And he was really tall and like you couldn't like not see him. But I remember him saying, you know, I don't know if I was showing him a contact sheet one day of my work and he was just like, these are really good. And I was just like, yeah, but like how will that be anything else? Like, or how will I know? And he was just like, if the work is good, it'll do the work. Like it'll do the thing to like, I don't, you know, and I don't even know what that means still. Although I feel like I'm living it out at the same time. So, for my thesis show, like when I was at Mass Art, like I was going home on the weekends and photographing my family, you know, and I photographed my mom a lot when I was at GCC, and when I was at Yale, I ended up photographing myself more. Early on, I started, you know, I was photographing my mom and whatnot, but I don't know if I've kind of
Yeah, no, I mean, I think what I was trying to, I think, pull from your experience is, and what I think I'm hearing is that at each institution, at each time, I think there is what it sounded like for you, a person, a situation that pushes you beyond. Like it seems like you're always reaching, I think, the caliber of the work. It's not, I guess that's what I was talking at the beginning. There's really never there's never any sense of a final product that will ever be exactly what you want. It's this continual motivation, and there are people that push you to that place. I think that is kind of the value of the experiences you have at different institutions. Also, those institutions provide for you certain experiences, whether it's a critique or interaction with other students or a certain expectation that I think also shape what you do. But those are all choices that you make. You made a choice to pursue the
But at Yale, like although they have an amazing kind of staff and faculty there, I was more influenced. I think that's where I realized that like what my voice really needed to be, or where it was coming from, where I wanted to direct it. And it was because I saw other students of color making work about their Black identity, and some sort of light went off, and I was just like, oh, well, I have an experience too, and it doesn't look like most of these. So, and I don't know if there's someone that I could have referenced when I was younger, that would have helped me through that. So it was a lot of the students that influenced me. I was kind of an underdog, I feel like, at Yale, but I still learned a lot from seeing a lot of different artists kind of exploring their story. And I remember later on, like, showing the work that I was making to Tom Young from GCC, and he was just like, I didn't really even know this about you because you didn't really talk about that, but there weren't even students of color at GCC when I was there. And, you know, I do remember like one assignment, some sort of, I don't know if it was self-portraiture, but I used myself and I painted half of my face black and half of my face white. And like, that was the one thing I can remember, like, starting to like address it, but I didn't really. I think they thought I was some sort of mime or whatever. And then, you know, like, I went to GCC, then I went to Mass Art. Then there was like 2 or 3 years out of, like, in between there where, you know, digital was just starting to kind of become a thing when I graduated from Mass Art. So there was a whole, like, new kind of terrain I had to learn and discover. And so I would take classes at GCC again. So I moved back to Orange. So I was like, oh, I need to, like, in order to keep this going, this momentum, I need to surround myself with other creatives and have the facilities to kind of make the work.
Right.
But so I think also that test of, like, are you going to keep doing the thing, even if you don't have anyone to necessarily make it for? No one's giving you an assignment. Or are you searching out those assignments, you know? And I worked at the Wendell Country Store as a, you know, side job. And while I was working there, I also ended up moving to Wendell. But I was interacting with the customers and, like, learning their stories. When you know what people's vices are, like what they're smoking, what they're drinking, then you start to, like, get to know them on a different level. And so, and there's like a certain amount of trust or something, I think, that builds up. And so, like, again, this kind of aha moment was like, oh, these are the people I need to be photographing. And so I started photographing people in Wendell. I would include myself in the photographs as well, with this idea of, like, where do I fit in the world? So, like, I would photograph myself with them, like, is this my family? Is this my space? You know, and that kind of, and I kind of melded, you know, Arbus with David Hilliard. So I was shooting these several frames to make one long panoramic image. I was still shooting film, but I was scanning it digitally. And so, like, or scanning it and then printing it digitally. Yeah, so the work that I made to get into Yale is drastically different than what I make today.
But it seems like you went through this kind of real exploration into kind of this internal reconciliation that you're going through with. I know that you reference this idea of invisibility and not black enough, not white enough, identity, race, all of those things kind of culminating. And yet I feel like you're right. A lot of your work definitely with the environment and the context, which definitely affects perception. when you got into Yale, it also sounds like there was a real significance to, I don't know if it was a particular cohort within photography or just the other artists, but it sounds like that was a huge influence on you too, to see other artists of color exploring this. And though your explorations are different, it kind of empowers you to some extent. And I'm sure still not very many of you even in that space, but
Yeah. I mean, even in photography, like there was only 10 of us. And so in my class, there was 3 Black students, including myself. And so, and I don't know, I feel like there was also this level of competition,
sure.
which for some I think weighed on people, but I used it as a motivation. Like whoever had the best crit, like I let that, you know, fire me up to a point where I was like, okay, like I want to get on that level, or I want to push myself to get folks to like really understand what I'm trying to get at, even though I still kind of felt like I was navigating blindly. And when I started photographing myself specifically, and I was putting on a guise, a character, and I didn't even really know what that was about. You know, I know how to explain it and talk through it now, but I instantly was, you know, Cindy Sherman to most of the people critiquing the work. And at first, you know, that's a cool compliment. And I don't even know if it was a compliment, you know, because it's like someone's already doing this is maybe something that went through my mind. And what are you bringing to it? And this idea that Cindy Sherman is kind of like the every woman, and I just couldn't relate to that when looking at her work in that sense. You know, I definitely could respond to the images themselves, but I didn't necessarily feel like represented. So I think I didn't let that get me to a place where I was like, oh, I'm not supposed to be making work like this or in this way, because I knew more so that my message was about this kind of light-skinned Black girl, this biracial girl, you know, navigating through the world, how other people see her. And I'm, you know, I'm still trying to unpack that, but the cool thing about once you're like out of school, as long as you can kind of keep it together, you're not necessarily having that like firing squad at you of like critical like words coming at you or opinions, and you have to kind of have it speak to you before anyone else, you know. And
You miss
a lot
that?
of what's that?
You miss that criticism? Do you feel like it is, so it's something you have to generate for yourself?
Yeah, and I've been fortunate enough to like have a really like amazing group of friends, and you know, continue to acquire mentors along the way. And so now in the way I work, I really don't let a lot of people look at it prior, you know.
Sure.
Often if something is that I've made scares me, or I'm nervous about how it's going to be read, then I feel like that ends up being the stronger work, you know. So I let myself be in that space a lot.
Yeah.
You know, of that unsure, or like, what are people going to think? And opposed to like, oh, I know this is going to work because I've done this before. And which I do have some ways that I work that are kind of like that too, you know. You know, some of the photographs I feel like work that way. It's kind of funny. I'm sitting in this spot where in my car right now, and I shot one of my photographs here. So it's kind of weird, like having this talk in this spot.
Right. Do
It's
you
red state, blue plate, if anyone wants to track me.
Did
Sorry.
everybody get that? Do you need to repeat that? I feel like the the idea of motivating oneself as an artist, having to create that critique, like all of these things, I think that sometimes you understand how challenging it can be, but it definitely is not for the faint of heart. But there are all these things that motivate you. And I wonder, as an artist, when you create work or when you have a finished product, do you feel any responsibility in the work that you've created to anyone, or for anything? Or is it more, I create the work, I put it out there. I don't feel any, responsibility to, so you mentioned a message. Is there something in there that you feel responsible to convey, or I don't know?
Yeah. I think I do feel like a sense of responsibility, um, in the sense that, just responses that I've had to the work. So I've already checked this box where I know there's people that can relate to the subject and feel like they have a voice through experiencing my work. Um, I also feel like the topics that I address. Okay, there's also going to be a train going by, so sorry.
Oh, I see it.
There it
That's
is.
great. That's cool. Except
Um,
for the telephone.
but yeah, like the responsibility, like I feel like also a lot of people have helped me along the way, like either monetarily or just, lending an ear or just kind of snapping me out of it if I was feeling low. That motivates me in the sense of like fulfilling that responsibility to like just show up,
Right,
you know.
right.
And when I didn't mention this earlier, but some might know that I didn't get into Yale my first time that I applied. So I I had to take a year and kind of realize that that really was what I wanted, and like, but what is the work going to do and shift, and how is that going to look? Um, and it's kind of like the like dusting yourself off if it doesn't work the way you originally like thought it would work, and yeah, the responsibility for, so like, yeah, I was saying, um, when I did get into Yale, I didn't have the funds to kind of pack up and move because of some financial aid things left over from Johnson and Wales. So there was kind of this like moment of like, I don't know how I'm even going to do this. I got in, but now what do I do? Can I even go?
Right, right.
So in Wendell, I came up with a plan to have a fundraiser that was loosely based off of this event we hold in Wendell called the Misfit Prom, which will come up again later, where I put together this half-hour lip sync video that was kind of like a journey, like telling my journey through pop music, and some of the people in the town got involved and were part of the videos. I kind of just asked people to make a donation, and so many people showed up. Tom Young, my professor at GCC, showed up, and I was just like, oh my God, if he can show up, that's amazing. Like, I'm doing something right,
Right, right.
And I think, Tom even wrote a letter of recommendation for me. But it just, like, the way people have showed up for me over my journey, it just is a constant reminder of like that responsibility. Like if I don't actually pursue this and reach it to the highest I can, then how do I show those people how much I, how much this really meant to me to really, pursue the thing.
Right, right. As I said, I've met artists who have met you and like have said how Genevieve has helped them, or that, I think that's a lot of the support system. I think there's often people underestimate or undervalue how much artists support other artists. Like I think they're their greatest patrons. They're their greatest supporters, critics, all of that. And I think that's part of I think it's part of the machine really that keeps it going in a weird kind of ironic way. But one of the things that I think about is, when you're continuing this, because you said this, you mentioned this before, at this particular point in your career, like, what it feels like to have a show in an institution, what it feels like to have work collected by a museum, what it feels like to have collectors, to be with a reputable gallery, all those things that many people who will watch this are trying to figure out how they do. Do you still have those moments where you feel like there are still these blind spots, and it is, it is not all certain, like you have a plan, but things change, and I think a lot of people would think you and what you've accomplished for them would be like, wow, well, what else is there, and what is it in your work? You display a lot of vulnerability and showing yourself and using yourself literally as the means of exploring what it is you want to discuss, whether it be race, identity, all of that sort of thing. And that's a lot. So when you go through this, what are the parts that we don't see? Like, are there things you're just like, what do I do next? Or what are the weird, hard things that happen for you, even at this point in your career, when a lot of people would perceive what you've accomplished as what more is there? I mean, obviously there's always more, but do you know what, being clear? Yeah.
For sure. I mean, even when I think about some of my friends that I went to Yale with, if I don't know necessarily what they wanted to do or what their path was, but there's some people that I don't even talk about what I'm doing with because I don't want them to feel discouraged or like they didn't follow what they maybe originally thought they were going to do. So I think having a bit of like understanding of just because you're seemingly having a moment, that's going to be more than a moment, but
right
to reference my work, sorry. It's like this time that we're all experiencing right now is a great example of like, I did have a plan and now it's not going the way I originally thought. So it doesn't mean that more won't come, but it's really like a lot of just reassessing. I'm interested in creating work that speaks to what's going on presently, and that happens to be, COVID right now.
Right.
But it also is still about race and identity in America and how folks are, being left out or not taken care of. And, I could go on and on. So ideally my work won't change necessarily like what I'm interested in, or what I feel my path is to kind of explore and but I think, yeah, I do allow myself to be vulnerable, but I also am kind of a loner in a lot of ways. Like I have to have that time where I am by myself to take it all in, or just have a sad day or a sad week. I don't know.
Yeah.
Or just take a walk by myself, put my headphones on and get lost in a song or an album. Um, and then, just, I mean, social media is a tool that I use to kind of just get a gauge on what people are interested in and focusing on. And a lot of my kind of language or the materials I use in my work um, are using things from the past to then talk about what's going on today,
Right.
in the sense of like that it's not that different. So I feel like I'm maybe going off on a different direction, but
What were you saying? I wasn't listening. Okay, so one of the things that I think, at this particular point, so we wanted to divide this up because it's really hard. I think people are seeing that, to kind of condense what the journey is in an hour and a half talk, or even one particular topic. But I think with this, what we wanted to garner was the beginnings, the things that made it difficult, but also made it happen. And if you think about now in a practical way, what we could call it advice, was there something maybe that a professor had you do, or an exercise that you do, whether it's writing certain things down, or if you were to talk to the Genevieve, 15 years ago, and, when you may have been kind of struggling, was there anything that you do now, or that something that someone asked you to do before? What would be a bit of advice or something that you would tell young artists now that are trying to do something similar to what you're doing, or trying to find their path? Is there anything that you would say to them about the beginning of all of this, or
yeah,
what to think about?
I think it's like I have a couple thoughts. Like I'm thinking about something specific to what a professor kind of had us do once. But I wanted to also just think about how a lot of times we beat ourselves up, especially when everyone's kind of going through this thing right now where we're, separate from each other and we can't live life as usual. And this expectation of like, what did I do today? And just don't beat yourself up. Even if you just wrote a word down that starts to be, something that will trigger a new idea tomorrow. I think we have this, I'll be like, oh, I didn't get anything done today. And I'm like, well, no, you did unpack all those boxes that of the materials that you got that you will eventually start to, create work with. So I think opposed to being like, what didn't I do? Like, just give yourself that reassurance that you did do something, even if it was just, watching that movie that made you laugh to get you a little bit further out of the funk that, a lot of us are falling into right now. And I guess just like let yourself have like these quiet moments to really have the things that feel important like come to mind. I guess people would call that meditation.
Yeah.
But thinking about an assignment that Tom Young gave us, I was thinking about this the other day. It felt like relevant to what we're going through now. And I might be messing this up because I'm like basing it totally off memory. I didn't talk to him to ask him what the assignment was, but I believe he was telling us an assignment that was given to him as a graduate student, and he went to RISD for grad school, and it was something along the lines, okay, we're going on a trip. We're going like on a trip to the moon, basically. So you all need to go home and pack your bags. And so, they went home, packed their bags. We're leaving on the next class, so they came to the next class with their bags packed. And the class obviously wasn't leaving on a trip to the moon, but it became kind of a show and tell of what they packed. And as the students kind of explained what they packed, where there was photographs of family, books, items of clothing, whatever, it seemed as though the professor was like, so that's what you need to be photographing. That's what you need to be focusing on. If those are the things that you're interested in, or those are the things that you would feel like you are lost without, then those are maybe the things you should be focusing on. And that really resonated with me then, and I feel like it's really relevant now to kind of, if I could only fit a few things in a bag, what does that look like, and what does that turn into as an art practice?
Does that, was it kind of like a point of departure to think about where your work is going, or was it more, is that something, it seems like that's something you could even do periodically in your life, like at this particular point, what would you take with you if you were leaving versus if you were asked to do this 5 years before,
Right.
but
or
really good exercise.
How do you adjust, based on what your surroundings are?
Right.
And
exactly.
when I was talking to a few students a week or so ago, and and this isn't for everyone, but just for me, I've kind of, often people will set up some sort of block, like, oh, I can't do this because I don't have this, or I can't do this because I don't have that. And it's not about having the best camera, it's not about having the best paintbrushes or whatever your medium is, or whatever you're drawn to. But because I remember a period of time where I didn't have a camera, but I would drive to Northampton and use their photo booth. And I would get these, different photo booth strips. I would bring friends there and we would create these different scenarios. And then I would take those they're not test strips, those photo booth strips,
Right.
and I would scan those. And then in Photoshop, I kind of reorganized to kind of make these almost like film strips of a story. And it was maybe more abstract, but it's just to say like that you can just, if you have a napkin and a pen, you can create something.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's often the case. I think a lot of people create excuses to not do versus excuses to do something.
Yeah.
And I'm sure definitely.
And then maybe you're just not supposed to be an artist.
Maybe not.
There are lots of things to do.
That's right.
And maybe, I think you and I are talking about this as like, or maybe we didn't really get into this, but like the art as a hobby versus art as a career, and what the kind of differences there. And there's no right or wrong, like
right.
if you use art as therapy to kind of just unwind from your everyday, then that's amazing.
That's right.
And some of us use it to, process all of our shit. And
yeah,
I don't know if there's a
That's okay. You know, one of the things we'd had a conversation, and, you know, it takes a lot for artists to sometimes commit. Like, you know, you wanted to, that's always how I define an artist. Like, there are lots of things you could do, but there's only really one thing you want and can do. You could do other things to make a living, but you can't stop. You can't stop making writers cannot stop writing. Doesn't matter where they are.
Yeah.
Artists, whatever medium, you can't stop doing it. And that's to me what defines an artist, but also what keeps that motivation. Because, you know, as I said at the beginning, it's not for the faint of heart. And I think as your career goes on, you have different motivations. And we were talking not too long ago, and I think you said something along the lines of, you know, I want my art to make a difference. I want an impact. You know, I often think about what students, the different sorts of artists that students are introduced to throughout their career. And we all know that there are lots of different artists, but they are not all represented within the canon, right? So these are times when a lot of the work that is being made will define and change the canon. You know, I think a lot of people call it revision. I don't really think of it as revision. I think there have just been omissions, and it's time to stop that. Like, we have to be proactive. But I think that's also very defining about people's work and the content of their work. We're going to talk about your work specifically, your practice and the motivation and the content in our next session. But I think that's something that strikes me as I listen to you, that that's something that's been constant all the way along, but maybe not something that necessarily was part of your conscious until you kind of went through these different stages. Like, it's become stronger and stronger and more defined, you know, even though it evolves.
Yeah, for sure. I just try and keep those key people that have shown up in my life at the forefront of my mind, to remind myself a responsibility I feel like I have, and in acknowledging them for being there for me, it's a reminder to myself to be there for others.
Right.
And I don't have any answers.
Yeah.
And even through my work, I feel like the work asks more questions,
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't I don't know what else.
That's okay. I'll grill you next time on that. The one thing that we all are wondering is, why are you in your car? That's, I think, what probably, that's the next question. So why are you in your car, Genevieve?
Oh my gosh. Today has, my whole thing with like coming to Massachusetts so I could be in this residency, it kind of halted, and it's got me in the woods of Massachusetts where internet is not my friend, and which is kind of like nice in one sense, but at the same time, it's like I really just was driving around to like 4 different places to find like the best setup.
That's commitment.
Everyone's like, oh, do you want to do like a studio tour? And I was like, I would if I had service in the space that I'm creating, So
yeah, but that's adapting.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, I'm cool. Like, I'm getting out of the house, and I'm staying safe and distancing myself from folks, but at the same time, I'm just appreciating the surroundings that I'm in, and I got my mask handy if I need to.
Yeah. Well, I mean, from the looks of it, it's a beautiful landscape behind you. So
yeah, this is a little interesting right here, but it's funny. I've had people ask me like, if you could live anywhere, where would you live? And I feel like they always want you to say some like kind of really amazing place that they know of. And in the back of my head, I'm always like, oh, I just want to go back to Wendell, where
Yeah.
I just want to work from that small place where, you know, I'm maybe the girl that, you know, went away and made herself some way in this art world, but always comes back to the place
Yeah.
that she felt like she could be herself, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, so
Yeah. Well,
kind
we're
of
going to
part of
talk a
that.
little bit. Yeah, we'll talk more about that next session. I think that's why we are so pleased to have you here. I think that, you know, when we talk about artists that are able to sustain a practice in the place that they want to, after having been somewhere else, but also being able to establish that in a place outside of a major art center. It takes a lot of work, and we'll definitely talk more about that in our next session. But I think there's something to be said too for most people, regardless of their profession, that many people do want to go back to where they started.
Yeah.
It feels, you know, it feels good. But there are two questions, and I don't know if we have any questions from anyone in the, I'm looking off here because this is my question center. If we have any questions from any of the attendees, we will definitely answer those. But my last two questions for you, and I'm going to ask you these every time, is I feel like, you know, in the state that we're in, we have a lot going on. And one thing that we all share, and you alluded to this before, is that we have highs and lows and we have to adapt. So I want to ask you one question, I think, that pertains specifically to this topic and your beginning and your origin. Kind of the high and the low. If you were to think of one particular memory in your career that is kind of a high point to this day, it may be very different for you 20 years from now, but if you were to think of the high point in your career to this day, what would that be?
Oh man. I feel like I've had quite a few, not to sound like
Yeah, no, well, that's
I
a
feel
great
like
thing.
I feel lucky, but and also yeah, I don't know if I could pinpoint exactly one. I could maybe call out a few.
Okay.
Um I guess having a museum show at the California African American Museum was huge. I mean, heck, just like finally getting into Yale was huge for me, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that I wanted to share was that, you know, kind of having goals set for yourself is helpful, but at a certain point, after I reached that goal of getting into Yale, I forgot to make another goal. And so it's kind of just turned into what it is now. But as you get further along, hopefully the right people are asking you those questions and asking you to reassess your goals and what's next. But I think, you know, I talked about coming back here to kind of center and feel like this is where I feel whole. I think just that move to LA to get me out of my comfort zone to really push myself is a good, you know, it's like it's a high point but was filled with lows, you know,
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
early part of that. Just kind of like, how the heck do I get seen, or who do I talk to, you know?
Right. Yeah, it takes a lot of courage to do that. So obviously on the flip side, I'm going to ask you, what would you, not necessarily a low point, but maybe more of, I always kind of think of it as a do-over. If you play golf, you know, like, what's your mulligan? Like, what would you want to have done over if you had a chance in your career to this point?
Mm-hmm.
Even just a chance to do it over, not necessarily, I don't know if the outcome would be different.
There's probably a few interviews that I did that I probably wish I had answered differently, or I don't know. I'm not really I mean, I can't say, obviously I've had struggles. This is a hard game to play, life.
Yeah.
And it's not, I'm sure I could come up with a bunch of things, like this one class I didn't show up to, where I was supposed to make a chocolate box for a certain grade, and I just like didn't show up. That's probably like one of the like things I feel most guilty about, and that's like back when I was in cooking school, you know. But honestly, like everything, even though in the moment it was like, man, I wish I didn't do that, or I wish I had done that differently, you get to a certain point where you're far enough away from it that you can just be like, oh, there's the learning like lesson in that thing that went kind of bad.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's good to hear that I think it's pretty evident that very little deters you. It's not a matter, I mean, we all get our lows and things like that, but
I can be in a low for like a chunk of time, to be honest, you know.
Yeah.
And I use my social media as like a tool for my career, so I'm not really the type that would, you know, post that I was, you know, feeling alone, or, you know.
Right.
And a lot of times I'm feeling alone, but at the same time I want to be left alone.
Right.
And I don't know how that even makes sense, but
right.
It, you know, it's just like you're learning yourself constantly.
Yeah.
You're just looking at yourself, I guess.
When you think back on like yourself as a child, or what were things that you felt like you wanted to do when you grew up? Like, what were some of the things that you thought, I mean, what did artists ever even, like, what were some of the things you're like, oh, I'm going to be
I think I said artist a lot.
Oh, okay.
I was really into music. I still am, but I was like going to be in a band maybe, but I didn't play any instruments. As a kid, I was in my room a lot, listening to the radio and drawing faces or ripping things out of magazines.
Yeah.
And listening to emo bands.
Yeah.
And the one radio station that was like in my town. WJTF, the best. So I have like talent of like knowing the most random songs from the past that most people don't care about.
Gift. It's a gift. So then my very last question for each day, I do this with my 7-year-old. My 13 won't participate anymore, but I do kind of think of like each day there's a rose and a thorn, like a high and a low. For today, what was your high and what was your low?
My low was trying to find the internet. And my high was like the last few panels that I was waiting for to be delivered showed up today, and so I'm like, I'm feeling excited because, you know, with the postal service right now, it's a little unclear when you can get things, and I was really excited when I ordered everything, and then I realized it was taking a lot longer than usual, and I was just like letting that kind of deflate me. But then I was like, oh, I'm picking up the stuff today, and you know, because I get like a random box of stuff, and I was just like, oh, but I need this to come in order to do this. So
right.
And I'm just, you know, inspired by, you know, kind of being in the place that I like to be.
Yeah.
Just kind of center myself. And so that in that high of like getting the materials that I needed, I'm feeling, you know, just excited to create a show for you guys and see what that looks like in the times that we're in right now.
Yeah. Well, we're really excited about it too. And we're really excited about the next 2 sessions. The next one, we want to really explore your practice. I think we could probably do several sessions on your practice, but I'm really excited about that because I think that though you only mention certain themes, I think that your work really transcends a multitude of themes beyond those. And so I really want to hear about how things kind of form for you and how you start your process. And then, yeah, and then our last one, I'm really excited about when you move to LA and how that all works, because I think people have a lot of ideas about how that works. And having grown up on the East Coast, why would you choose LA versus New York? I think is probably on a lot of people's minds. So we definitely want to explore that. And this particular session will be available on our website, and we will put the link to that. We'll also have kind of the highlights of some of what Genevieve has shared with us. And yeah, I really want to thank you, Genevieve, for, for sharing your stories with us and being here with us. Virtually is just as good as in person, but we're looking forward to having you here with us in person too. So you're just one of my favorite people in the whole wide world.
Oh, you're so sweet.
You really are.
Really had some helpful tidbits in it, and I feel like I speak best through my work, so it's always a challenge to kind of do these things for me, but I'm open to it. And if even one person kind of gets a fraction of something they need from it, then it's worth it.
Yeah, it only takes one person. And I'm gonna hold out. I'm looking at the screen. If there's anybody that wants to do a chat and let us know if there are any questions, you could do that before we sign off. Okay, let's see. Go into the chat box, friends.
I don't think.
Not going to push it. Just wanted to make sure. Wanted to be thorough. So thanks to everyone who did join us, and look for the next session with Genevieve from her car again, we're hoping. And again, thanks, Genevieve, and have a great rest of the evening and a great rest of the evening to everybody. And thanks to everybody who do this. So later, Genevieve. You're awesome. See you later. Bye, everybody. Again, thanks for joining us.